Hey everyone, this is Bob McIntosh from Mass Higher Lowell Career Center, and I have today with me Kevin Turner, who's going to be talking about branding in your job search. So how you really conduct a successful job search with your personal branding. Now, Kevin is a LinkedIn connection of mine, and I've known Kevin since, what do you think it is, Kevin? When did we connect?
100 years ago. No.
It seems like that because you and I really have a good communication between us. It was November 16th of 2018. I've had connections who I've known longer than that, but who I don't feel is, I know is best of you. So yeah, so, and I always say for these guest speaker events that almost all of my guest speakers come from LinkedIn, like how I'm connected with them. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a testament of my personal branding on LinkedIn, but that's what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to let you all read Kevin's bio. I don't believe in just reading someone's bio. Just wanted to know, just wanted you to know a little bit about Kevin in terms of his personality and so forth. Kevin, do you have anything more to add, than what they see in your bio?
Just that I, like you, love to connect, love to network. I'm a true believer that if you do it right, networking always beats not working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Opportunities come to you if you do it well. And I think that's what got us to connect, is we're both networkers and we love that. We love helping each other and helping others. And that's really what LinkedIn is about.
We do.
So that's why that was the place we met.
And Kevin, I don't know if you know Greg Johnson, who's out in Los Angeles. He's a Lakers fan. I don't blame him for that, but he's a connection.
I try not to know too many Lakers fans.
Yeah, absolutely. So Greg Johnson is with us today. I'm totally psyched about this. He's been a guest speaker for me in the past, and you've been a guest speaker. This is your second time, so I really appreciate you volunteering to do this. I think we're going to have a great show, so let's go forward with it.
Fantastic.
All right. So could you just give us a little definition of personal branding? Because I think, there's some confusion around it. I think everyone has a different definition of branding. What would yours be?
I look at branding and personal branding is we all have one already, right? Mm-hmm. It is our reputation.
Right.
You hear people say your brand is what people say when you're not in the room, right? And most people allow their brand to be created by others based on what they do, right? And that's kind of very normal, but sometimes it's not the best approach, right? I always look at, in my career, there were things that I did extremely well that I never, ever want to do again. So they never find their way into my brand, right? And so that crafting is probably the worst term. When somebody says, I'm going to craft you, your personal brand, that means you're going to become something you're not. I always say you want to refine that reputation, right? Refine the value add that you bring to the table that is unique to you, that's going to get you to your goals. That is personal branding. And so I think it's real important for people to understand that you already have one. Now it's time to refine it so that it works for you 24/7.
Good. And, in terms of personal branding, is it only something we do in our job search, or is it, is it prevalent in our daily lives?
I think it's everything we do. Whether you're dating or you're in a relationship or, you're developing work relationships, whatever it is, there's always an element of it. If you want to focus to get where you want to be, you bring that branding in. And again, it is as simple as our reputation. And so we want to make sure that we are nurturing what people think that reputation is.
Okay. And so throughout this webinar, we're going to be talking about how, job seekers can nurture their personal branding in their elements of the job search. But before we go further, could you tell us, and this is a phrase I think you coined, what do you consider personal branding?
That was what I would see when somebody would say, I need help with my brand, right? Or I need to get known, or I need to get this to happen. You would go to their profile, or you'd go to a resume, or you go, And what it was is they basically took everything they've ever done in their life and they just threw it in there and said, that's my brand. That's
Mm.
everything. I am the Jack and Jill of all trades, right? And they'll figure it out because that's my brand.
Yeah.
That is personal branding. It's kind of this inadvertent or accidental demarketing of oneself, right? Whether you give them way too much information or you don't give them any at all, it really doesn't set you apart. And that's the key.
Yeah, and I was thinking more in terms of not giving enough information. In other words, having a resume, let's say, that just has the bare basics and really doesn't sell themselves.
Well, absolutely. And many people will fall into that, right? It looks like, if I picked up two resumes, yours and mine, and they read the same, they looked the same, we had the same responsibilities, I wouldn't be able to tell us apart, right? So how would I know who to bring in? And so that's where that kind of branding goes from blanding to branding, right? Is that unique ad in there, that little bit of personality, that points of achievement,
Yeah.
that go in there that are uniquely yours or mine, and that's what sets it apart. And people always worry about personal branding is bragging, right?
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes actually came from Muhammad Ali, and he used to say, "It isn't bragging if you can back it up."
Right.
I'm going to say Muhammad Ali could brag, right? He was noisy, but he always backed it up.
What
And so,
happened to athletes like that though?
I don't know. They're all crazy now. But that's what we've got to do. We've got to do a little bit of that Muhammad Ali bragging, but we're going to back it up. So if anybody reads it, they go, wow, Bob really can do that because he has done it and he just showed me how. He gave me the numbers, right? So you got to back this stuff up. And if you can do that, then it isn't bragging, right? It's branding.
Right.
And that's really key.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to break here to conduct a poll because this is what I love to do during webinars and guest speaker events. So I'm going to conduct a poll and I'm going to ask for your feedback when we get the results. So for everyone out there, yeah, take a drink, okay? Okay, so I've launched the poll. All right, I'm getting some good action here, Kevin.
All right, I answered yes.
Oh, really? Okay. Do you have a strong understanding of personal branding? Yeah, I guess you would. Absolutely.
I think that's fantastic that you can poll during this process. So very cool.
Oh, yeah. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I also want to remind the audience that they can ask questions whenever they want, but try to make them brief so I can read through them quickly. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in about 10 seconds.
I love that.
This is a nice feature of GoToWebinar.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So I'll share the results. And what we have here is 28% say yes, they have a strong understanding of personal branding. 61% say sort of, and 11% say no. So what are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
I think it's fantastic that people are more aware than they used to be. If you took that same poll 3-4 years ago, I think no would have been, way up front. Everybody be like, I don't know what it is. I hear about it. I don't know what it is. So people are becoming more aware of it and the power behind it. And I think that's fantastic. But they don't always know, how do you do it?
Right.
How do you get to that brand? And I think that's where you're getting a lot of the yeses and sort ofs, because they've heard about it, but they really don't know how to get there. They're not comfortable with that yet. And believe it or not, writing about yourself, speaking about yourself can be one of the most difficult things to do. You could do it about somebody else easier than you can do it about yourself because you're so close to the subject matter. Everything you've ever done, you've got all this skin in the game. You want to tell everybody everything. And that gets back to that blanding, right? You tell them too much or you tell them not enough because you're uncomfortable with what's there right now. And so that's where that, refining comes in, because when you get to it, if you don't have it refined, you're going to end up kind of rambling, right? And trying to figure out what it is that they want to hear. And that's not branding at all.
So I have two comments I'd like to read to you, and one is from one of my customers who writes, this is a big weakness for women in terms of personal branding. What are your thoughts on that?
I think because of bias in society and in the workplace, I think women have a more difficult time in branding in the sense that they have to be comfortable more so than men do, I think, in what that brand looks like. How does it move across? Because if a woman is assertive, and the branding is assertive, there can be other, concepts from I think primitive people, right?
Mhm.
So they've got to get kind of that delicate balance more so than I think men do, just because of society and how it was and how it's evolving is changing. So I think that's less so than it was 10 years ago, less so than it was even 2 years ago.
Mhm.
But I think it's still there. I think it's harder on women than it is on men.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. So one person writes that some people think they have a better understanding of branding than they actually do. That is why they get landing. You find that's true?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Again, so many people, if you ask them, they'll give you the story. They're the Jack and Jill of all trades, right?
Right, right. Yeah.
And the end of that phrase is masters of none, right?
Hmm.
Nobody hires masters of none unless you're running a convent, right? It's the only time you hire a master of none. And that's that branding piece. They think they know, right? And they're just throwing it all out there because they know that that's part of who they are, but it's not refined enough. And so sometimes people get into more trouble thinking they understand it,
Hmm.
in that sense, and kind of pushing that forward. And a great way to check it out is to ask people that are close to you, ask people that are not close to you,
Yeah.
what do you think I stand for? What would be your impression in one sentence? You know, who is Bob or who is Kevin in one sentence?
Absolutely.
Whatever comes back.
Absolutely. And I feel like asking you right now, who am I? What is my brand? But you don't have to do
I,
that.
I will tell you what your brand is. You are a collaborator that believes in, lifting all boats. And I think
Hmm.
that's fantastic. You help job seekers really kind of find their goals, right? Get to that place that they need to be and secure it and move forward. I think that is one of those components of what I call a giver, right?
Hmm.
And I think there's always that benefit of being a giver. It's a perfect brand because givers get 10x, right? When you
Yeah.
give a lot, more comes back to you. And I think people don't realize that. But I think that's your brand, collaborator, giver. And that's one of the reasons I'm always excited to do anything with you.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. And I feel the same about you too, because you give information, about LinkedIn to everyone. And so thank you for that. So I do have a number of questions still. And so one person writes, how one could make a personal brand individuality shine through the automated screening tools that summarize candidates' information using no one knows algorithms. Yeah.
And I completely understand it. And, to
Hmm.
me, an algorithm is math, right? That's all it is. It's running math, it's running equations to pick up things like keywords,
Sure.
timing, those kind of things. As long as you understand that's what it's doing, it shouldn't affect the brand that you put in place because the information that you're providing isn't going to get filtered out. It's going to be brought into that database. It's going to move forward with it. So you have that opportunity to bring that in. And one of the things that I think is one of the strongest ways to brand within a resume is not to use these buzzwords and adjectives and,
Right.
basically sound like everybody else. Make it that individual contribution, that proof metric. I was talking with somebody the other day and they
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
up with this metric that they had created a process that saved 1,000 people hours. I say, hey, that's great. How
Hmm.
much would you have paid the person? They said probably $45 an hour times 1,000 times 12. Now you have this annual estimated savings up, right? That's a refine of that brand within that resume, right? Or profile. And that's how you get that across. So you always want, as part of your brand, if you're seeking opportunity, that you're an achiever, right? That you go above and beyond what the current job asks you to do, and you deliver for the employee or the employer, that's one of the best components of a brand, and that should be finding its way into the resume and the profile, because that's
Yeah.
going to get you there.
Well, speaking of the resume, and I think some people in the audience might be thinking that we are just addressing, say, executive level job seekers. But what about someone who is more entry level? How could they better brand themselves, with their resume?
Part of that is knowing the audience, right? Who is it? Who are you looking to excite? If you're applying to Nike, right?
Sure.
You want to bring into that resume that you run marathons, that you do things that are behind the brand of Nike that make a fit, right? So anytime we're applying, even if you think about applying as in LinkedIn and branding to land, right? In the sense of attracting, we should know that audience. We should know what their goals are and how they align with our goals, and then bring that information in. So there's ways of putting a little more personality into that resume, bringing in things that would resonate with the hirer, right? They're a little more personal. They're not job related. Did I run a marathon because, it was job related? Probably not. You can't make somebody do that, right? They got to want to do that. But if you bring that in, that's a way to bring that kind of personal brand that's going to help them understand you better.
I love that, because some people think that a hobbies section on the resume is taboo. It shouldn't be on there. But I love that. I love that idea. And of course, during the interview, the person would be asked, "Okay, so which shoes do you wear, to run your marathons, right?" But what about
know their brand?
Yeah. So what about mature workers, though? Do you think they should have a hobbies section indicating that they're vibrant? What do you think about that?
The two things when we think of ageism, right?
Yeah.
The two kind of counter brand filters, right, out there are energy and knowledge of new technologies, right? So if you want to appear not old, because there's a difference between being old and being of age, right?
Right.
Look at Jack LaLanne. I don't remember everybody, but remember Jack LaLanne.
Yeah.
That guy into his late 80s was a muscle house, right? He was never old. He had an age, but he was never old.
Exactly.
And so you want to bring that across in that resume, in the way that you place your words will actually empower you to make you seem more energetic, right? That's on the writing side. So you don't want to be bland in the terms you use, right? You don't want to reuse a lot of terms, because that's a way to bland. You want to use ones that have energy, that are exciting. And then when you're outside of this kind of written approach, you want to show that energy as well. If I went to your LinkedIn profile, you should have that profile video going, and it should show you've got energy, right? You could do events.
The profile, you mean the video when you click my face, my photo, it shows it runs the video. Are you talking about that?
Absolutely.
Oh God, then I failed. I failed in that way.
But you want to get that energy in there, right? I mean, nobody ever tells me I don't have energy. I am older,
right?
But I have the energy. And then, bringing in the knowledge of technology is also a great way to get over that kind of ageism or age issue. And so you can show that in what you do.
So that's a good point. And since you're bringing up energy, how would you say one would demonstrate that with their profile?
I think everything from your image, your picture, right, should be strong, should show energy, shouldn't show that you're, it shouldn't show that you're amongst a group of people. It should be about you. It should be you moving forward.
Right.
Somebody should look at that and say, that's got energy, right? Same thing on the background banner, put something in there that moves you forward. Part of the beauty of LinkedIn, which we don't really get in our resumes, is there's a lot of visual that comes in here. That background banner, majority of the time I'll go to people and they've got the 3 shades of gray, right? The default.
Right.
Well, 3 shades of gray make us look old, right? Get something in there that makes a statement, and be careful with that picture, because pictures, they say what are worth 1,000 words, right?
Yeah, sure.
They're now on LinkedIn 24/7. If your picture was golfing, fly fishing in Montana, these are great things, or, there's other pictures you could have on the beach, right? What that image, it might be nice and exciting and energetic, but it might tell an employer, if I can't reach Bob, I know he's on the beach, right?
So let me interrupt here just for a second, because I'm on your headline, right?
Yes.
Audience, do you see, raise your hand if you see Kevin's LinkedIn profile. Please raise your hand. Okay, good. So your profile is being seen by the audience. So one of my customers asked in the question box, okay, so can you brand yourself with your headline? So this area right here.
Absolutely. And you think about it, you've got a lot of space in that headline, right? So some of that headline is what we want to get our keywords into there, right? Our SEO needs to be in there. But the beginning of that headline, about the first 40 characters, are going to show up everywhere you go on LinkedIn. So if you're in an audio room, if you're commenting, if you're posting, that first part is the most important part, right?
Okay.
You really want to have that speak to the audience that you want to attract so they understand what you do. And I look at a headline, I actually prefer the term digital handshake, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about the length of time to write or to read it as it would be to have a normal handshake, right? If you're holding their hand too long, it gets creepy, right? If you're holding your hand too short, it seems insincere, right? So you want to be able to make a statement as if you were shaking somebody's hand, that they could then walk away and say, I know exactly what value Bob brings to the table.
Okay.
That's your headline.
So I think really what we've been talking about is surface information. Like the profile is really surface information, but and when I look at people's profiles, what I want to know is, are they active or engaging on LinkedIn? Mm-hmm. So going to your activity, what should I expect from someone who is who is trying to brand themselves through their activity on LinkedIn? What should I expect there?
Well, I mean, you should see that they're out there. Whether they're posting or they have a newsletter or they're in events, not as important as if they're at least commenting and adding value, right? So that's what people are going to look for. And sometimes, seeing what you post, is really controlled, right? You've spent your time putting it all together. I know that that's a real controlled factor. I would look, when I'm trying to figure out who is somebody really, I look at that comments activity. And also look, there's another area to kind of look into, who mentions them. But I look in that comments, because comments people think of as just kind of drive by, if they're just going, hey, good post, that's cool, great. Then that person's not really going to be very engaging, right? That's who they are. They're being polite, but they're not being very engaging. If they're actually adding value in that comment, supporting the process, or even having a disagreement in a polite way, those are positives, right?
So I think what you're describing now is, aside from posting your own content, I think what you're describing in terms of commenting would be for those who are just starting to use LinkedIn, or maybe have used LinkedIn but are in the job search. So are you saying that just by commenting, that would add to their personal brand in a positive way?
Absolutely, as long as those comments add value, right?
Right.
No drive-by comments. They've got to add value. And believe it or not, recruiters, they look at that stuff because they're trying to get a feel for you. They're trying to say, does Bob fit in our culture? Well, based on those comments, yes or no, right?
Okay.
So they're looking at that stuff. They know whatever we post, when we're comfortable enough to post, is very controlled, but they know that the comments almost feel like something we're doing off to the side, right? That they can now get a peek into, a little deeper into how we conduct ourselves when we're not in the spotlight. And so I think comments are critical. And the one thing that I have found, and there's many studies out there, is when somebody is interested in you for employment, right? The first thing they do 95% of the time is they come to LinkedIn and they do these kind of checks. What does the profile look like? Does it match up with, or is it consistent and supportive of the resume you submitted? Those kind of things are really important, And so they will dig deeply into this to really find out more about you, especially if the race is really tight, right? It's you and one other person. This is where they're going to be able to go and really do a lot of research.
All right. So Kevin, I know that LinkedIn is one of your favorite topics, and we could talk about this all day. we literally could. So
Absolutely, all week.
I know. So let's talk about then networking. How about networking? How could we support our personal brand in our networking?
Well, and that is the incredible part of LinkedIn, in the sense that we can now digitally network, right? We have no bounds. If we're at home, maybe we don't have the budget to travel or the time, right? We can digitally network as well. But networking is critical. It is how we get out there. It's how we become remembered, right? And that's a big piece of our brand. If we craft the greatest brand, but nobody knows about it, nobody's exposed to it, it's not really going to do anything. And the only way to get that exposure is to network. And one of the best ways to network is always offering something to the other individual that you're networking with, right? Whether it is your support, whether it's your thought leadership in certain areas, but always offer. Because if you think about it, all your best relationships in life are ones that are mutually beneficial, right? You're giving, they're giving. And if you start giving to somebody as you're networking and they're not giving back, well, that's actually not a mutually beneficial network. That should tell you a little bit right there. But it's a big part of that process. And, I think we mentioned earlier, I believe in that networking always beats not working. Now, when I say not working, that could be, finding the next job, but it could also be if you're in sales, right? And you are networking with people and you're supporting them and you're helping them grow their business, they do come back to you for that next sale, right? That's that social selling. So networking is a big piece of it. And we should network not for ourselves in the sense of, I want you to know about me and what I sell and what I do, or I need a job. That's not networking, right? Networking is that I think truly honest kind of, I want to build a relationship with you in that process that is mutually beneficial. And I think that's key.
So, but networking seems to, it seems to scare people. That just that word networking scares people. How can we make it more acceptable, more comfortable to network through trying to build our personal brand?
And I think when we do refine that personal brand, right, we become more confident in ourselves, and people respond more confident in us. So if you had that digital handshake, that you could then introduce yourself, whether it's on LinkedIn or whether it's in a meeting room, that somebody on the other side said, oh, wow, right? If I shake somebody's hand, I let them know that, I effectively eliminate organizational and personal branding. And the first thing they say is, oh, that's funny. They'll laugh, and that's kind of cute. I like that. Or they'll say, we've got so much branding going on here. We need your help, right? Immediately leads into that next conversation. So knowing that brand, being confident about that brand, and using it as your introduction in the process is a fantastic way to get over the hump of being afraid of networking. And LinkedIn allows you to kind of hide behind your screen a little bit, right? And start networking more, start joining audio rooms, force yourself to be a speaker, to be brought up on the stage in an audio room. It's not recorded, right? So nobody's going to hear it a day later. Nobody's, it's not embarrassing. Do those kind of things to build that confidence, right? And to be able to deliver and test that brand message that you have, ease your way into it. Digital networking is the easiest way to get into networking. And all of a sudden, you're going to get to a point where you are so comfortable with that brand that doing it out in the public is easy, right? It becomes.
So are you saying that a good place to start networking would be digitally, like on LinkedIn? Do you believe that? I'd say I believe that.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't have met. Had we shown up in a room, I don't know if we would have gotten to each other.
Yeah, and if you lived, let's say, 150 miles away from me, we would probably meet each other at some point, right?
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
Here, we made it happen. And that was
Yeah.
about just kind of getting in there. And you weren't selling anything. I wasn't selling anything, right?
No,
We
never would.
were sharing and kind of figuring out this whole world together. And that created a connectivity. And so I think that's what people need to know is digital is a nice kind of gateway to networking in the real world. And I always tell people, if you think about LinkedIn as a microcosm of the real world, right?
Mhm.
What works in LinkedIn, or I could even say the other way, what works in the real world works in LinkedIn, right?
Right.
So you think about everything that you do in the real world that is successful, you bring that into LinkedIn, you refine it, and you bring it back out to the real world, you're going to do better. And I think it's a nice place to kind of practice the process.
I think so. I think so because I don't think that, a connection is truly bona fide unless, you've met them on LinkedIn and then you reach out to them in a personal way. Yeah, telephone call or even meet in person. But so someone writes great analogy with the digital handshake, I imagine. But another person writes, most people say my brand is very specific. It's a niche. So she's talking about herself.
Mm-hmm.
Can that be okay? I mean, can you have a very specific brand?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, there's a lot of studies out there that say the more fine-tuned your value is that you bring to the table, right? The more you fine-tune that,
Yeah.
the faster you will find the right opportunities. Because what you're doing is when that opportunity exists, you're really low risk because you are zeroed in on it, right? You're laser focused on that. Now,
Sure.
that means you've got to understand, what is that? What am I going to brand myself in that niche sense? And is that niche hiring, right? So if the niche isn't hiring anymore, if you are branding yourself as the print master of printed paper, that might be a little more difficult, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
know what you're branding about, because you got to brand towards something that has opportunity as well.
So one thing I do in my webinars is I ask people to write in the question box something like, and I'm going to do this now, how would you describe your niche brand? So for the audience, would you write that in the question box and I'll read it as Kevin's going along? Okay, so LinkedIn, a great gateway. I like that. So I think that's what the audience member was saying is a great gateway to networking in person.
Yes,
I think.
absolutely.
Now, this brings us back to our personal branding in terms of our LinkedIn photo. What if you have a photo that is of you maybe 20 years ago, and
Yeah.
then you meet a person in person, right? Or on the screen, on a Zoom networking event.
It's like when you see an advertisement for McDonald's hamburger, right? And it's
Yeah,
plump and it's juicy, and you look at that, and the vegetables are fresh, and then you get to McDonald's, and it's like that and flat and
right,
tasteless, right? Represent yourself as you are today. That's what your LinkedIn picture should be. It shouldn't
yeah,
be a glamour shot. It shouldn't be your high school graduation picture, right? Use what they would recognize you today as. And the reason being, if I went and I shaved off my beard, right?
mhm,
People are staring at me, and Kevin's got a beard. That's what's in the back of their head. I show up without a beard. They might not be able to tell. And I've
right,
had this before because I've done this. Sometimes it takes people 7 days that I know every single day to go, wow, you shaved your beard. I was like, yeah, that was a week ago, right?
mm,
So if you show up and they don't know why it's different, all they will have in the back of their head is something's not right. I don't trust this individual, right? So
right,
if you have differences, let's say you colored your hair purple. If that's your thing, right?
mhm,
Get a picture with your hair purple, because if you show up with purple hair and it was pink the day before, there's an issue, right? And
right,
sometimes they
right.
can't put their fingers on it. So
So
it's
that gets us to the point of
okay.
branding being consistent, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Consistent branding. So someone writes as their niche brand that they're warm and sincere. Um, is that enough though? Is that enough to promote in order to be successful in the job search? Or do you need to have some type of area of expertise? Say, like you were mentioning earlier, a printer, which would at this time be unfortunate, but in any case, um, And then
And
someone else wrote, my extensive investor relations and corporate communication experience, including building a global communications department and so on and so forth. So more, of the executive level. But it is totally possible for someone who is entry level to mid management either to, brand themselves personally.
Absolutely. And you going back to that warm, it depends on who the audience is, right? If I
Okay.
want to be a stockbroker, would I care if I was hiring a stockbroker that he was warm and fuzzy, right?
Right,
Probably
right.
not. I want a killer, right?
Yeah.
If I was hiring a doctor or a nurse, right,
Yeah.
or caregiver, I would want warm, right? So it depends on who the audience is in that sense. So you got to know who they are, what do they want, can you deliver it? If you can't, you shouldn't be branding towards it, right? Because it's got to be true to you. It's refined, not crafted. So if that is a fit for that industry,
Good point. Good
and
point.
you can use those terms. Absolutely.
So my niche brand, HR generalist with expertise in fast-paced, high-growth environments from Kelly, strong background in teaching training from Kevin, leader with outstanding track record of success in diverse leadership positions, Kevin again, and then a niche brand, genetic engineer and molecular biologist. Okay, so now the audience is coming alive. Okay. Right? Someone writes, Maureen writes, customer service focused. So some people really have a pretty good sense of their niche brand or, their specific brand.
And I think that's huge. Now, when you have that, make sure it's a little different. I always say a little different makes all the difference, right? So
To
you can
separate
have
yourself from the rest, right?
but you want it to be unique to yourself in the sense of how do you do that differently, right? And that's really important as well, because we can brand personally, and if it sounds like everybody else's, then it becomes too bland, right?
Yes. So someone writes, I have experience of working in different industries, assisting customers, clients, and colleagues, being an intricate part of a smooth flowing office and customer satisfaction. So would you ask people if they were to, if they were to highlight their personal branding, would you ask it to be shorter, like a shorter statement?
Depending on the situation, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And I always go back to the best timing is the timing that you shake somebody's hand, right? That digital handshake. And you think about it, you know exactly how long that is. You hold somebody's hand that you've never met before, right? And you're trying to get them to buy into you. You know what that time frame is. If you get your statement to that size, you're going to be memorable and you're going to have a value that they see immediately. That's going to be the most effective brand.
Sure.
Right. Everything else is a development there forward.
Now, someone writes, branding can also be highlighted when folks write recommendations for you on LinkedIn. Here's my thought is that rarely do people view others' recommendations. However, one thing that I pointed out in a webinar where I showed my audience your profile is that link that directed people to your recommendations. So do you think, so obviously you think recommendations weigh heavily in your personal branding, right?
Well, absolutely. We can say whatever we want about ourselves. If somebody else doesn't say it too, it's just us saying it, right? So you want the backup, and people can't always go and ask questions, but they can always read written recommendations.
Yep.
And they're critical to get. And you do want to work with the person recommending you to make sure that that recommendation helps you move forward, right?
Sure.
I did freehand tax and payroll accounting when I was in venture capital. I was really good at it. It was pre-software, right? I wouldn't want anybody to write that in a recommendation because I never want to do that ever again in my life.
Sure.
So be sure you help them sometimes in what that recommendation might say.
So what about interviewing? Because I mean, this is really the big ball game is the interview. How can you brand yourself personally during an interview or even before or after an interview?
Well, and I think part of that we've talked a little bit about
Mhm.
You know, if they're out there, they're interested and they're bringing you into the interview, they've probably been to your LinkedIn, right? Make
Yeah.
sure you're consistent with that image and you know what that drive is behind that. Um, Another component of that is to look at who is interviewing you, understand some of their hot points, right? If they've got pictures of their kids playing baseball, you've got a connectivity that
Right.
you can then show that you are warm, right? That you're caring, that you love your family as well, because it's important to them. So make those connectivities in that process. And then, you know, back to that whole ageist kind of thing, right? If they're worried about you don't know technology, you don't have energy, you know, show that you have energy. Don't sit at the back of your seat like this. Sit on the
Right.
edge, right? Lean forward, connect with them. Talk about technology that is hot and new, maybe even controversial. You don't have to say, I buy into it 100%. You could
Sure.
say, I understand it, both negatives and positives. And right now, the big thing right now is all these LLMs, chat GTP is being a big one, you know, Bard, those kind of things.
We
Some
talked
people
about
are afraid it's going to take my job. I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to stay away from it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate
that.
it. That's not a good conversation starter. So
No.
try it, check it out, figure out what's good, figure out what's bad, because it probably will come up in an interview now. They're going to say, well, have you used chat GTP? You want to be able to say, yes, I've tried it. I've used it. My line is, I find it can be an incredible muse, but never a total solution.
So is it
That's
too simple to
important.
say that being relevant is part of your personal branding?
Absolutely, because
You know what I
who
mean?
wants
Like in
irrelevant?
an interview, if you can prove that you're relevant in terms of what the employer wants, you know, you're talking about technology, chat GPT and so forth. So that's part of it, right?
Well, relevancy has a timing, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Uh, I always look at, you know, if you're running a business and you have to have some software, are you going to buy CRM software that's 15 years old because it's cheap, or you know, cybersecurity that's 5 years old because I can
Mhm.
get it for free? No, you want to know what is relevant but timely, right? So if you're telling me about what you did 20 years ago, that's not going to impress. That's not going to get you forward. Tell me about the timing of that relevancy. What's current? What's now? What's been within recent years? And on average, most industries, most positions, the last 10 years is what we call your current business skill set, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Anything before that does become a little irrelevant. Doesn't mean you can't have it on a resume, but you want to slim it down, right? Spend most of your time in that last 10 years. And again,
Sure.
that is industry and position specific, right? If you were in cybersecurity, I couldn't care what you did 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I want to know what you're doing this week,
Sure.
maybe even next week, right? So you want to focus it based on the timing of that position and industry. And that's where you want to focus the majority, you know, of that kind of knowledge. Now, if you are a antique boat builder, 50 years of experience,
Yeah.
what I want in an antique wooden boat builder, right? You've got it, you know,
Right.
but there's
Right.
not a lot of those jobs left. That's something you create on your own, right? And so sometimes you can expand on that timing, but that's the 5%, right? That
So
having it.
something you said caught my attention, and you said that going back beyond 10 or 15 years probably isn't wise. So getting back to the resume, is that what you would suggest in term of personal branding, is to show that you're current on your resume?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And you know, you'll notice
Hmm.
if you apply to a applicant tracking system, if it only takes the last 2 jobs and you add the last 2 jobs up and that's 10 years,
Right.
they're telling you what their timing is. If you apply and it only takes the first job and that ends at 5 years, they're telling you the timing, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So if they say, and you can fill in the rest if you want to, don't bother,
Hmm.
because what you're doing is basically they're telling you, we're not going to use that to run our algorithms to decide whether you move forward, because our value of timing is this, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes the systems tell us, and even LinkedIn, when you look at LinkedIn, the work experience, right?
Hmm.
You pull up somebody's profile, the work experience truncates, and then it says see more, right?
Right. Right.
What LinkedIn is telling you, and it'll do it right at 10 years. See more
Hmm.
usually hits at about 10 years, depending on the level of your position. But that's basically telling you that's the the timing of business skill sets.
Okay, I've got a couple of more niche brands here, and that is my brand, renewable energy generation and sustainable use in my, is my passion. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure is my focus. I think this is actually a good exercise because people in the audience are hearing about each other, and maybe it might, they might have ideas as for what Marlon would like, what Marlon should go after in terms of a job. Another one, documentation control, manage the ECO workflow in the defense tech sector. That's Lawrence. So one person writes, where would you place a great recommendation review on LinkedIn? Okay, so that's for LinkedIn webinar, but yeah, okay. And then someone writes, oh, my husband was an anti-dealer.
Yeah. But even back, and I was thinking about the one that was more green, right? Green is hot right now. It was very technical in its explanation, right? That is going to sound like many other people in that green industry, right? If you can come in with a statement like changing the world 1 watt at a time, passionate about, right? Give them something that, again, if you introduced yourself with that handshake, I would probably remember Bob. He's changing the world 1 watt at a time. Or he's
I will say, I know Marlon. I will say that Marlon, he would say, I want to leave this world a better place.
There you go.
He said that, and I loved it. I loved it.
That's a brand statement, right?
Yeah.
That's unique to it. So I think that's the key. Make it unique, make it powerful, make it memorable, right? When you leave that room, you want them to only remember you.
Absolutely. So getting back to interviews, what about appearance? What about first impressions? Do those add to your personal branding? Can they detract from your personal branding?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it goes back to know the audience, right? If I'm applying to be a roadie for the Rolling Stones, I'm not showing up like this, right? I've got my oldest Rolling Stones t-shirt on, right? And I let my hair grow out a little. It depends on who you're interviewing with. If you get there, it's always best to interview to impress, right?
Yeah.
If it's standard business, wear the suit and tie if you can, or for the ladies, the equivalent, but make sure you're there to impress them that this is how you show, because they're going to look at that and say, this is the best Bob ever gets, right? This is what we should expect, maybe a little less every day. And if you get there and everybody's just wearing a jacket and a shirt and no tie, you can say, hey, do you mind if I loosen my neck python, right? And you take it off. You match the audience, right? Or if they're there with a jacket and shirt and they take off their jacket, or they show up without their jackets, take your jacket off. Get comfortable. You don't want to be sweaty under your arms, right? Match the audience, but always go in there. If you don't know what your audience is, always go in there dressed your best, right? Because you can reduce that dress. You can never then whip a tie out of your briefcase and put it on, right? Because that looks like you're not prepared. Why did you do that? Why weren't you coming in with it? They know it's not your brand. So,
one thing you've really stressed today is knowing your audience. I never really thought of personal branding in that way, knowing your audience, but that is true.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
So someone writes, writing that intersection between technology and people through project management. That would be their niche brand. Yeah. I think people are getting the idea, don't you, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, well then let's see. I have another poll. I tell you, I love my polls.
I like them too.
Okay, so where do you feel you need help with your personal branding? Okay, so this is where I love the self-awareness of the audience, because they're always very, very honest in their answers.
Well, this will be interesting because these are all incredible areas, and they have to support each other, right? So to me, they're all very, very important.
Okay, good number of people have voted so far.
Fantastic.
I think you're going to be interested in the results.
I love that.
Huh?
You've got a very active audience, and I love that.
Oh yeah. I always do. I always have good audience. So I'm going to give them 10 more seconds. Sometimes they get 100%, but not often. Okay, let me share the results with you, Kevin. So can you see those?
Yeah.
The majority of people have trouble with their LinkedIn profile in terms of their personal branding.
And to me, that's not a shocker in that sense, because we know it's out there, right? It's
Yeah,
public as public can get. When we're networking, often we're very focused on where we do that, right? Same thing with the interviewing. It's a very focused environment.
true.
Same with the resume. We don't just throw it out there and leave it on the internet. We send it to certain people for certain things. So those other three are very in control. Whereas LinkedIn, it's out there 24/7, right? 365. That's why people are a little more maybe cautious of that, a little more afraid of getting that all put together. But they shouldn't be, because what we do find out on LinkedIn is we're all people, right? We're all a little bit different. And as long as you bring that difference out, right, that's what's gonna change things. So
Right.
just be who you are and bring it out.
All right. So, man, this has been this has been very, very cool. And I really appreciate you volunteering to talk to my folks about personal branding. Is there anything else you want to add, or have we exhausted the topic?
The only thing I would add is be your best professional self, right?
Sure.
Because sometimes our personal branding may not be what we want to throw out there, right? So
Sure.
always think of it in the sense of employability. So be your best professional self. If you wouldn't do it in front of your grandma, right, or your granddad, don't do it on LinkedIn, right? That's a good litmus test, but be your best professional self. That's going to help you be found by employers who also want that. And so on LinkedIn, anywhere else on the internet now, be your best professional self.
And including, the way that you craft your resume, the way that your LinkedIn profile, network, and even the interview. Their personal branding plays a big part in all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And once you spend the time to refine it and get it right, it becomes very natural. And people shouldn't be afraid of that. It does take some time. It does take some critical think, right?
Yeah.
But when you get there, it's worth the effort, because it starts to fit. People start to get to know you better for that. And as long as you know where you want to go, who your audience is, and then you're refining the brand to get you there, you'll feel the momentum, right?
Yeah.
And you'll know that time was well spent.
Well, when you're talking about knowing your audience, that's a big takeaway for me, in terms of how you present your personal brand, because it could be different, right? The way you present yourself could be different from one audience to another. But
that's why I never like when people say it has to be this way.
It has to be,
right? Because it doesn't have to be that way. It has to be your way. And you got to know where you want to go and who's going to be there to get you there. So all pieces of it.
Well, I feel that this has been a great education for me, and I hope it has been for the audience. And I want to thank you again for the second time you've been here. Thank you for, being our guest speaker. All right. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and I love our relationship. Thank you very much.
And yep, absolutely.